Hello everyone. Today we are going to Denmark to look at a case that is nearly 100 years old. So sit back as we go to early 20th century Copenhagen. Dagmar Overbye was born on April the 23rd, 1887 in a small Danish village. Her parents, Sean and Anne-Marie, were poor farmers. She was known as a moody and demanding child. Despite being the top of her class at school, she often lied and stole. When she was 12, she was caught stealing a neighbour's purse. This really upset her parents, who are hard-working, honest people, so they sent her to work on a big farm in Funen. The owner of the farm paid Dagmar a pitiful wage and made the young girl clean the house, wash the clothes, cook, and milk the cows. After a while, she left the farm and worked as a servant in several other homes in the island. But when she was caught stealing from her last place of work, she was arrested and spent 10 days in a woman's prison in Svendborg. When she was released, she returned to her childhood home. She quickly found work as a waitress. While working there, she would often serve a regular customer named Bisgard. They would always smile at each other and make small talk, and even started to go out when Dagmar finished work. They did not get married, but eventually they moved in together, and Dagmar gave birth to a baby boy. The pressures of parenthood took their toll on the young couple, and this was compounded when their baby died in somewhat mysterious circumstances. When the doctor held an inquest, he observed that the infant had blue lips, a condition which could indicate choking, but the death certificate stated that the child had died from pneumonia. The local people were very suspicious of how the baby had died, and with all the rumours circulating about Dagmar, she left her boyfriend Bisgard and left town. In 1912, she met and fell in love with Jens Sorensen. He didn't know it, but at the time he met her, she was already pregnant with another man's child. Dagmar gave birth to a baby girl and called her Irena Marie, and immediately put the child up for adoption as not to further embarrass Jens. A year later, she was once again pregnant. Jens, however, didn't want her to have the child and instructed her to have a termination. Dagmar would not do this, so went through with the pregnancy, and when the baby was born, she abandoned him in a haystack. She had hoped to marry Jens, but after the baby's birth, he told her he did not want to marry her, and a devastated Dagmar tried to commit suicide. She didn't succeed. Dagmar pulled herself together and left Jens, and managed to reunite with her daughter Irena, who had been adopted 3 years earlier, and together they went to the nation's capital, Copenhagen. She was a clever and resourceful lady, and soon opened her own sweet shop. It was now 1915, and World War I was engulfing Europe. And although Denmark remained neutral, they had a land border with Germany, so the war affected the nation. Here she met a gentleman by the name of Svensden, and along with her daughter, they all moved in together. Unfortunately, the sweet shop failed to make enough money, so Dagmar closed it down and looked for other ways of making a living. She began working as a professional childminder, and one day while reading a newspaper, she read an article about women who had been given 500 kroners to adopt a baby. The fee for taking in a child was substantial, amounting to just over a year's salary for a woman. This gave Dagmar the idea to set up a sort of unofficial adoption agency. Her plan was to take in children born out of wedlock and find them parents to adopt them. For the first child, Dagmar accepted. She would be paid an upfront fee and a monthly maintenance fee. She looked in the newspapers to find young mothers advertising babies for adoption when she came across one placed by 26-year-old Rasmin Jensen. She had given birth to a boy out of wedlock and wanted to have him adopted. Dagmar contacted the mother, and on the 15th of April 1916, Rasmin put her 3-week-old infant son, Harry, into Dagmar's care. She gave her 12 kroner, which was the first month's payment. The agreement was that Rasmin would pay Dagmar 12 kroner every month until she had got the child adopted. Soon after accepting the child and taking payment, Dagmar put the baby into a pram and took him for a walk. For some reason, however, she decided to strangle the child and then dumped him in a public toilet at a local cemetery. The body stayed there for 3 days before it was found by the cleaners. The day the body was found, Dagmar wrote a letter to the mother, reassuring her that the child was doing well. Strangely, she wrote that the child was not crying at all, which of course was tragically true. 14 days later, she did it again. She accepted a child from a worried mother, murdered it, and dumped the body under a bridge. At this point, Dagmar started to justify her actions. Most of the babies born out of wedlock were from impoverished mothers. Terminations were illegal and often performed in backstreet clinics and were considered dangerous. Young girls were usually frightened of both the illegality of the action and the dangers to their health, so many preferred to have the child and tried to find a good home for the baby once it was born. This was such easy money for her, an upfront payment, sometimes followed by maintenance payments, and no expense after she had killed the baby. But Dagmar had a concern. Whenever she disposed of the bodies, they would eventually be found. So she came up with an idea. Instead of dumping the bodies, as she had her first 2 killings, she could burn the infants in her masonry heater. In July 1920, a young factory worker named Caroline Agosen had a baby out of wedlock. Young Caroline was from a very Christian family who were ashamed of her and would not permit her to bring the child into the family home, so the best solution was to put the child up for adoption. Caroline put an advertisement in a local newspaper trying to find a nice family to adopt her newborn child. It was a simple ad that read, "Parents wanted for a little girl of 3 weeks old, preferably a nice, loving Christian home." Dagmar was always looking for these types of adverts and quickly answered it. The 2 of them arranged for Caroline to take the baby named Sarah to Dagmar's home on August the 30th, 1920. Caroline was very upset and explained to Dagmar that she wasn't entirely sure if giving her baby up for adoption was the right thing to do. Dagmar told her that she would find a good home for the child, saying that she acted as an intermediary between unwanted children and adoptive families, and it usually took about 2 weeks until she found the right family for the baby. Eventually, Caroline agreed this probably was the best option for her baby and her family, so paid Dagmar her fee of 200 kroner. This was equivalent to 1 year's wages for a domestic worker in Denmark in 1920. The following day, Caroline, distressed and upset, went back to Dagmar's apartment and explained that she had made a big mistake, so asked to have her baby back. Dagmar was shocked to see the girl back so soon and told the young mother that unfortunately she had already placed the child with a lady she met in the Istengard district of Copenhagen. But she couldn't remember the exact address of the family. She asked Caroline to return later and she would have the address. Caroline returned 3 times, and each time Dagmar told her the family had adopted the baby and she could not get the baby back. Caroline was a determined young woman and, desperate to be reunited with her child, went to the police. The police took the complaint very seriously and went to visit Dagmar and searched her home. What they found was shocking. As well as baby clothes, they found the remains of babies. They found bones and a skull in the ashes of the stove. Dagmar was arrested and the police called in investigators to search and examine the premises. Dagmar, however, did not deny her crime and confessed to the deaths of 16 children. The authorities only recovered the remains of 9 infants, so she was charged with 9 counts of murder. The police suspected that she had actually killed at least 25 babies, including her own child. The press instantly reported the crime, and the headlines about Denmark's most notorious serial killer dominated the front pages and caused a national scandal. Dagmar's adoption service was illegal, but so was having a termination. The moral debate started to dominate the conversations in cafes, bars and street corners. These poor, unfortunate young women, who in many cases had been abandoned by the father and shunned by their families, had no money to raise a child and no support from the state. Some thought an illegal adoption agency was their only choice. Adoption agencies were a service that was very much needed in 1920s Denmark. Society had turned their back on the young women whose children were born out of wedlock, and unless the state acted, there would probably be more Dagmars and so many more poor frightened young girls with babies they were unable to support. Dagmar's trial started in March 1921, and she did not deny her crime. At the trial, more revelations came to light when the investigators' evidence included photographs they had found in her home of 20 naked children she had murdered. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. While awaiting her execution, the reigning monarch, King Christian, commuted the sentence to life in prison, saying that in Denmark we don't put our women to death. In 1923, the Danish government passed a law relating to children born out of wedlock, which provided for both the supervision of foster children and the creation of a home for children born from unmarried mothers. Dagmar served her remaining years in prison and eventually died on the 6th of May 1929 at the age of 42. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening to this sad and tragic case. Please leave your comments and your feedback, and I will see you all in the next brief case.